What if the most terrifying survivors of the ancient world were not kings, armies, or empires, but bloodlines whispered about in the tents of Israel, remembered in the ruins of Canaan, and feared even by soldiers who had seen the Red Sea split open before their eyes? Long after the waters of the Great Flood had swallowed the old world, long after Noah's Ark had come to rest upon the mountains and mankind had begun again under a sky washed clean by judgment, there remained stories that would not die. They were not ordinary stories told to frighten children at night. They were the kind of stories men repeated in low voices beside dying campfires, the kind that made warriors look over their shoulders when the wind moved across the hills. They were stories of giant peoples, ancient, powerful, violent, and strangely connected to the shadowed memory of the world before the flood. By the time Moses led Israel through the wilderness, the earth was no longer empty and new. Kingdoms had risen. Cities had been built with walls thick enough to defy siege. Trade roads crossed deserts. Armies marched beneath bronze weapons and painted shields. Egypt had grown proud. Canaan was filled with fortified towns. And beyond the Jordan River stretched lands with names that carried weight: Moab, Ammon, Edom, Bashan. But among all these lands, some names caused a deeper fear than others. Rephaim, Anakim, Emim, Zamzummim. These were not merely tribes. To the ancient mind, they were remnants, survivors of a terrible age, echoes of the giants remembered before the flood. The book of Genesis tells us that before the flood, there were mighty ones on the earth, men of renown, beings whose presence became part of the corruption and violence that filled the old world. The flood came as divine judgment, cleansing the earth of that violence. Yet centuries later, the biblical record speaks again of giant peoples living in the land of Canaan and east of the Jordan. This is where the mystery begins. How did such peoples appear after the flood? Were they separate giant clans that rose later through human bloodlines? Were they remembered through legendary names given to unusually tall warrior tribes? Were they seen as spiritual echoes of the pre-flood rebellion? The Bible does not pause to explain every detail. Instead, it does something more powerful. It places these peoples directly in the path of Israel, making them part of the test of faith that stood between slavery and promise. Imagine the wilderness at night. The Israelites are camped under a sky burning with stars. Around them are the sounds of animals, children, restless men, and the quiet movement of guards. They have escaped Egypt, but Egypt is not the only enemy they carry with them. They carry fear. They carry memory. They remember Pharaoh's whips, the brick pits, the bodies of Hebrew infants thrown into the Nile. They remember the miracles, yes, the plagues, the Passover, the sea opening before them, but human fear is stubborn. Even people who have seen miracles can tremble before rumors. And the rumors from Canaan were terrifying. When Moses first sent spies into the Promised Land, they returned carrying fruit so large that a cluster of grapes had to be carried on a pole between two men. The land was rich, flowing with milk and honey. It was exactly as God had promised. But the spies did not speak first about the beauty of the land. They spoke about the strength of the people. They spoke about fortified cities. They spoke about descendants of Anak. And then came the sentence that froze the camp. We seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. That one sentence reveals the emotional power of the Anakim. The spies were not describing a normal enemy. They were describing men so physically overwhelming, so culturally feared, that Israel forgot the God who had crushed Egypt. The Anakim were associated with great height and great strength, living in places like Hebron, a city already ancient in memory. Their ancestor Anak became a name of dread. To stand before the sons of Anak was not simply to fight tall men. It was to face the old nightmare that mankind had tried to bury since the flood. Hebron itself carried deep meaning. Long before Israel came near it with swords, Abraham had walked that land. Sarah had died there. The cave of Machpelah, the burial place of the patriarchs, lay in that region. The promises of God were tied to its soil. Yet when the spies saw Hebron, they did not think first of Abraham. They thought of giants. This is one of the great tragedies of fear. It makes men forget inheritance and see only impossibility. Among the 12 spies, only Joshua and Caleb saw differently. They did not deny the giants. They did not pretend the cities were weak. Their faith was not blindness. They saw the same walls, the same warriors, the same Anakim. But they measured the giants against God, not God against the giants. Caleb, especially, would never forget Hebron. Decades later, when he was an old man, he would ask for that mountain, the very region where the Anakim had lived. Most men grow cautious with age, but Caleb grew more determined. The place that had once terrified a nation became the place he wanted as his inheritance. But before Israel could face the Anakim west of the Jordan, they had to face another giant shadow east of it. Og, King of Bashan. Bashan was not a weak or forgotten land. It was a fertile region, famous for strong cattle, rich pastures, and powerful cities. Its landscape rose in dark volcanic highlands, with fortified towns and old stone structures that must have seemed almost unbreakable to desert wanderers. In biblical memory, Bashan became associated with strength, pride, and danger. And ruling over that land was Og, one of the last of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were remembered as an ancient people of unusual size and power. Different regions had different names for such giant clans. The Moabites called some of them Emim. The Ammonites spoke of Zamzummim. In Canaan, the Anakim were feared. East of the Jordan, the Rephaim left their name like a scar across the land. Og was not just another king. He was a living symbol of that old race. His bed, according to Deuteronomy, was made of iron and measured 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in width. In modern terms, depending on the cubit used, that could suggest something around 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. Whether it was his actual bed, a royal funerary couch, or a ceremonial object meant to display his greatness, the message was clear. Og was remembered as enormous. For Israel, the battle against Og was more than a military campaign. It was a confrontation with fear itself. Picture Moses, aged yet unbroken, standing before a people who had wandered for 40 years because their fathers had feared giants. The old generation had fallen in the wilderness. The children who once heard their parents cry in terror were now grown men and women. They had buried fathers, mothers, uncles, and leaders in desert sand. They knew the cost of unbelief. Now the same ancient fear stood before them again, armed and enthroned in Bashan. Og came out against Israel with all his people for battle at Edrei. The text gives few dramatic details, but silence can be powerful. We are left to imagine the scene. The army of Bashan advancing, the reputation of the Rephaim pressing down on Israel like a storm, the old stories rushing through every Hebrew mind. Perhaps some remembered the Spies report from their childhood. Perhaps some heard their parents whisper the word giants with shame. And now here was Og, not a rumor, not a distant tale, but a king in armor, commanding cities and warriors. Then came the word of the Lord to Moses, "Do not fear him." That sentence matters because it proves there was something to fear. God does not tell people not to fear shadows that are not real. Og was real. His army was real. Bashan's fortified cities were real. But God's command placed a limit around their terror. The giant king could stand tall, but he could not stand outside the authority of the God of Israel. The battle ended not with Israel's defeat, but with Og's destruction. His people were struck down, his cities taken, his kingdom broken. The last great Rephaim king east of the Jordan fell before the people whose parents had once been too afraid to enter the promised land. In that victory, Israel learned something essential. Giants could be defeated. The old nightmare could bleed. The legends could fall. But the story of the giants does not end with Og. It moves westward into Canaan, where the Anakim still held their ground. To understand why the Anakim mattered so deeply, one must understand the psychology of Israel's conquest. Canaan was not empty land waiting peacefully for new settlers. It was a land of city-states, tribal territories, religious strongholds, and military resistance. The Israelites were not entering a soft frontier. They were entering a world with walls, kings, and deeply rooted cultures. The Anakim represented the strongest form of that resistance. They were the visible argument against faith. Every tall warrior on a wall seemed to say, "God brought you out of Egypt only to die here. This is why the first generation failed." The issue was not information. They had accurate intelligence. The land was fruitful, the cities were strong, the Anakim were there. Their failure was interpretation. They interpreted the facts without faith. They saw themselves as grasshoppers because they had forgotten that God had already overthrown the greatest empire they knew. The second generation had to learn a different interpretation. They had to look at giants and see not impossibility, but territory promised by God. Joshua's campaigns eventually broke the power of many Canaanite kings. The biblical text says Joshua cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, Anab, and other regions, though some remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. That detail is chilling because it connects the story forward. Gath would later become famous as the home of another giant warrior, Goliath. This means the shadow of the Anakim did not disappear immediately. It lingered on the edges of Israel's history. The giants who terrified Moses' generation became the background of later battles in the days of David. The biblical story stretches across centuries, showing that every generation faces its own giant, but the lesson remains the same. Og fell before Moses. The Anakim fell before Joshua and Caleb. Goliath fell before David. The pattern is unmistakable. But to make this story feel real, we must step inside the human experience. We must imagine not only kings and battles, but ordinary people living beneath the weight of these names. Imagine a young Israelite boy named Eliab, born in the wilderness after the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. His earliest memories are not of Egypt, but of graves. He remembers walking with his mother past piles of stones marking where men had died. He remembers old people speaking of a land they had refused to enter. He hears the word Anakim before he ever sees a city. To him, giants are not just tall men. They are the reason his family has no home. His father had been young when the spies returned. He had stood among the crowd when the camp erupted in panic. He had heard men shout that they should choose another leader and return to Egypt. He had watched Moses fall on his face and Joshua tear his clothes. For 40 years, Eliab's father carried that shame. Every time another funeral procession moved through the camp, he knew they were still walking beneath the sentence of unbelief. Then, near the end of the wandering, Eliab hears that Israel is approaching the territories east of the Jordan. The air changes. Men sharpen weapons. Leaders count families. Scouts return with news. There are kings ahead. Not Pharaoh, not Amalekite raiders, but kings with cities and armies. Sihon of the Amorites falls first. Israel defeats him and takes his land. Hope spreads through the camp. For the first time, the wilderness generation sees conquest not as a story, but as something their own hands can survive. Then comes the name Og. The old men grow quiet when they hear it. Mothers pull children closer. Warriors pretend not to be afraid. The king of Bashan is not spoken of like other kings. He is of the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed is legendary. His land is strong. His cities are many. Some say his people are like the old ones, the mighty ones of ancient memory. Eliab watches his father's face and sees something he has never seen before. The fear of Kadesh returning. That night, Eliab asks, "Father, are they really giants?" His father does not answer quickly. He looks toward the darkness beyond the camp, toward the land of Bashan. Finally, he says, "They are men, but fear makes men larger than they are." Eliab knows there is more behind those words. The next day, word spreads that the Lord has spoken to Moses. Do not fear him. Eliab repeats the sentence under his breath as if it were a weapon. Do not fear him. Do not fear him. Do not fear him. Around him, thousands of Israelites prepare for battle, but the true battlefield is inside their chests. The old fear is rising. The old report is being tested. This is Kadesh again, but with a different generation. When the armies meet near Edrei, the sight of Bashan's forces is overwhelming. Their shields catch the sun. Their lines stretch across the ground. Their commanders move with confidence. Somewhere among them is Og, King of Bashan, the giant ruler whose name has crossed deserts and generations. Eliab's mouth goes dry. His hands tighten around his weapon. For a moment, he understands his father's generation. He understands how a man can see a promise and still want to run. Then the trumpets of Israel sound. The battle begins. There is nothing clean or easy about ancient war. It is dust, shouting, metal, blood, and confusion. Men do not fall like stories say they fall. They stumble, scream, clutch wounds, call for mothers, call for God. Eliab is pushed forward by the line behind him. He sees a warrior of Bashan swing a heavy weapon that crushes the shield of the man beside him. He smells sweat and iron. He hears someone shouting the name of Moses. He hears someone else shouting that the king is near. Then, through the chaos, Eliab sees him. Og is not a myth. He is flesh and power. He towers above the men around him, broad and terrible, wearing the presence of a man who has never expected defeat. Whether he is as tall as the legends claim or simply massive enough to become legend, it does not matter in that moment. The effect is the same. Men shrink before him. Fear travels faster than arrows. But something else moves through Israel's line too. Memory. Not the memory of failure, but the memory of the Red Sea. The memory of manna. The memory of water from rock. The memory of a pillar of fire in the night. The memory of God saying, "Do not fear him." Og's army breaks. The giant king of Bashan, the remnant of the Rephaim, falls. The land that seemed impossible is taken. The cities of Bashan, fortified and proud, become testimony. Israel does not win because its men are taller, stronger, or more experienced. Israel wins because the Lord has given the enemy into their hand. That evening, Eliab walks among the aftermath. The sun is low. The battlefield is quiet except for the wounded and the work of burial. His father stands beside him, older than before, as if some weight has finally lifted. "Now you have seen," his father says. "Seen what? That giants are not greater than God." Years later, when Israel crosses the Jordan under Joshua, Eliab is no longer a frightened young man. He has seen Bashan fall. He has seen the great King Og reduced to memory. But Canaan still waits, and with it the Anakim. The crossing of the Jordan is itself a miracle. The waters stop and the people pass through on dry ground. It is a new exodus, a sign that the God who brought them out of Egypt is bringing them in. Stones are taken from the riverbed and set up as a memorial. Children will one day ask what the stones mean, and fathers will answer that the Lord cut off the waters before the Ark of the Covenant. But beyond the miracle lies war. Jericho falls in a way no military school would teach. The people march, the priests blow trumpets, the walls collapse. Ai teaches them that sin in the camp can bring defeat. Southern kings gather. Northern kings gather. Canaan resists. But slowly, city by city, region by region, the promise becomes possession. Still, the hill country remains psychologically powerful because that is where the Anakim had been seen. Caleb comes to Joshua with a request that must have stirred every memory in the camp. He reminds Joshua of the day Moses sent them from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Caleb had been 40 years old then. Now he is 85. His body has aged, but his faith has not. He says he is still strong for war. Then he asks for the mountain where the Anakim are, the very place that had once terrified Israel. There is something magnificent about Caleb. He does not ask for an easy valley, a comfortable town, or a quiet retirement. He asks for the place fear once stole from him. He asks for Hebron. For 45 years, Caleb has carried a promise. 45 years is long enough for most men to lower their expectations. It is long enough to become practical, cautious, reasonable. But Caleb has kept alive the fire of a younger man who believed God when almost everyone else trembled. When he finally stands before Joshua, he is not merely asking for land. He is asking for the right to finish the sentence that fear interrupted. Hebron is not empty. The Anakim are there. Their names are remembered. Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, descendants of Anak. These names had once entered Israel's camp like poison. They had helped turn a nation back into the wilderness. Now Caleb marches toward them. Imagine Caleb climbing the slopes of Hebron, his hair white, his eyes fierce. Around him are younger warriors who may wonder if the old man has lost his mind. But Caleb knows exactly what he is doing. Every step is a rebuke to unbelief. Every breath says, "The Lord who promised is still alive." The Anakim of Hebron fall. The city of the patriarchs becomes Caleb's inheritance. The place of fear becomes the place of faith fulfilled. The graves of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are no longer surrounded by the power of giants. The promise has come home. This is one of the most powerful reversals in the biblical story. The first generation looked at the Anakim and said, "We cannot." Caleb looked at the same Anakim and said, "If the Lord is with me, I will drive them out." The difference was not in the size of the giants. The difference was in the size of their faith. But the Bible's giant traditions are not simple monster tales. They carry theological weight. In the ancient Near East, kings often presented themselves as larger than life. Height, strength, and ancient lineage were symbols of legitimacy and terror. A giant king was not just physically imposing. He represented a rival claim to dominion. Og of Bashan, the Anakim of Hebron, and later Goliath of Gath all stand as embodiments of human pride magnified. They are what the world trusts. Size, weapons, bloodline, reputation, intimidation. Israel's victories over them declare that covenant faith is stronger than visible power. For a modern American audience, this story may sound almost cinematic. Desert wanderers, ancient giants, lost cities, a king with an iron bed, spies trembling like grasshoppers, an old warrior demanding a mountain. But beneath the cinematic power is a very human question. What do people do when the promise of God leads them straight toward the thing they fear most? Moses had to face that question. Joshua had to face it. Caleb had to face it. Israel had to face it. And the answer was never that the giants were imaginary. The answer was that they were not ultimate. The Rephaim and Anakim function in the biblical narrative like living tests. They expose what is inside people. The spies saw them and revealed unbelief. Caleb saw them and revealed trust. Israel's first generation saw giants and imagined themselves as insects. Israel's second generation saw giants and learned they could be overcome. Og saw himself as unconquerable, but he fell. The Anakim saw themselves as rooted in the hill country, but Caleb drove them out. There is also a deeper mystery in the survival of giant clans after the flood. The Bible gives us fragments, not a full scientific explanation. Some readers believe these post-flood giants came from new lines of unusually large warrior peoples. Others connect them typologically to the pre-flood Nephilim tradition, seeing in them a renewed expression of rebellion and violence. Some understand the language as ancient war rhetoric describing exceptionally tall and feared clans. Yet the biblical text treats them as real peoples who occupied real territories and confronted Israel at real moments in redemptive history. The key point is not curiosity alone. The key point is conflict. Whatever their exact origin, the Rephaim and Anakim became part of the spiritual geography of Israel's journey. They stood between promise and possession. And that is why Og's defeat matters so much. Og is the last great named figure of the Rephaim east of the Jordan. He is like a gatekeeper of old terror. Before Israel enters Canaan, God gives them a victory over a giant king. It is as if the Lord allows the new generation to rehearse courage before the main campaign begins. If Og can fall, then the Anakim can fall. If Bashan can be taken, then Hebron can be taken. If the Rephaim cannot stop God's word, then no wall in Canaan can. This is why Moses later reminds Israel of these victories. Memory is a weapon. People forget quickly. Fear rewrites history. So Moses retells what happened to Sion and Og. He wants Israel to carry those victories into the future. He wants them to understand that obedience depends on remembering correctly. In the American imagination, giants often belong to fantasy, creatures of myth, movies, and legends. But in the Bible, giants are not entertainment. They are obstacles with names, cities, weapons, and reputations. They are part of the moral drama of history. They reveal the contrast between what humans see and what God says. The story begins with a flood that cleanses the earth but does not end human rebellion. It continues through nations that rise, corrupt themselves, and build power through fear. It narrows to one family, Abraham's family, promised a land they do not yet possess. It moves through slavery in Egypt, deliverance through Moses, failure in the wilderness, and finally conquest under Joshua. Along the way, the giants appear like dark milestones, reminding us that the old violence still haunts the world. But they never get the final word. Og does not get the final word. Anak does not get the final word. The terrified spies do not get the final word. Even the wilderness graves do not get the final word. The final word belongs to the God who keeps promises across generations. If you stand back and look at the whole narrative, it becomes astonishing. The people who were once slaves in Egypt defeat kings whose names were associated with legendary strength. A shepherd named Moses outlasts Pharaoh and Og. An old man named Caleb takes the mountain of the Anakim. A young David later kills the champion from Gath. Again and again, the Bible overturns the logic of power. The world says height wins. God says faithfulness wins. The world says reputation wins. God says covenant wins. The world says the past determines the future. God says promise determines the future. And perhaps that is why these ancient giant stories still grip us. They are strange, yes. They are mysterious. They open questions about the world before and after the flood that scholars and believers still debate. But they also speak directly to the human heart. Everyone knows what it means to face something that feels too large. Everyone knows what it means to feel like a grasshopper. Everyone knows the sound of fear when it uses facts to argue against faith. The spies were not wrong about the size of the Anakim. They were wrong about the size of God. That is the center of the story. So imagine one final scene. The sun sets over Hebron. The battles are over for the day. Caleb stands on the high ground, looking across the land promised long ago to Abraham. The air is cooler now. The shadows stretch across stones older than his grandfather's stories. Somewhere beneath that soil lie the bones of patriarchs who believed promises they did not fully see fulfilled. Around Caleb are the signs of struggle. Broken gates, tired men, smoke rising faintly from the city. The Anakim who once made Israel tremble are gone from this place. Caleb is 85 years old, but in that moment he is younger than the men who feared at Kadesh. He has lived long enough to see fear defeated by faith. He has watched a generation die because they measured themselves against giants instead of measuring giants against God. He has watched another generation rise, cross the Jordan, and take hold of the promise. He remembers the day the spies returned. He remembers the grapes, the panic, the crying, the rebellion. He remembers standing almost alone with Joshua. He remembers saying the land could be taken. He remembers being ignored. Now he stands in the very land they said could never be taken. The mountain is quiet, the giants are gone, and the promise remains.